Nearly 1 year after hundreds of schoolgirls were abducted by the terror group Boko Haram, there are reports that its members may have massacred as many as 2,000 people earlier this month. Joining us now for more, in Boston, Massachusetts via Skype, Max Abrams, political scientist at Northeastern University and a term member at the Council on Foreign Relations. And with us here in studio, Chidi Nwanyanwu, Social Secretary for the Nigerian Canadian Association. And Max and Chidi, it's good to have both of you on our program tonight as we explore this most appalling issue. Max, perhaps you could get us started on this. This week, reports have been coming out that Boko Haram has taken over the city of Baga. Can you fill us in on what you know to have happened there?
It's an absolute disgrace. Boko Haram is one of the most lethal terrorist groups and has been since 2010. And the group is becoming unbelievably even more and more audacious, partly perhaps from learning some of the lessons of Islamic State. Today, Boko Haram is interested not only in massacring people, but in occupying territory, particularly in the northeastern quadrant of the country. And unfortunately, there wasn't much international media attention paid to this latest tragedy. The France attacks completely eclipsed any media coverage in Nigeria. And I really have to credit Amnesty International for revealing, partly through satellite images, that the statements of the leader there, Goodluck Jonathan, who says that only 150 people were killed, are inaccurate, and that estimates of around 2,000 people are probably more likely. So we're beginning to find out more about this tragedy. It's more of the same, but it appears to have escalated. And frankly, this latest attack in Baga is unprecedented in its scale.
Okay, lots to unpack there, Max. Chidi, maybe you and I can help do some of that. First of all, why Baga? What would be the significance of attacking that part of the country?
What I think is the significance, and this is my opinion, I'm not the spokesperson, is that Boko Haram, their wants and their agenda has been progressive. They keep changing as they go on. So they seem to have discovered that there's a need to capture a place, install a caliphate, and install a government. So when they saw that opportunity, having weakened that area of Nigeria, they feel that they should now attack it and do a cleansing, total cleansing, establish their government. And I would think that is the significance of attacking that small Baga.
They were vulnerable there to begin with, so
all the
more reason.
Yeah.
We're hearing quite disparate numbers about how many people have been killed. Some estimates 150, others 2,000. What's your understanding of it?
My candid opinion, again, this is based on what my inference from TV and the radio and all that, and someone from the country of Nigeria. I think the figures may be exaggerated, because you don't even have the media presence in Nigeria. You don't have that kind of coverage that will be able to tell you the truth. So we're just in between what the government is saying and what Amnesty International, which is not really, I know they use satellites. Again, you heard him saying satellites, not physical presence in the place. So I would say it is, yeah, the numbers may be plenty, but I think they're a little bit exaggerated.
Max, are the high numbers problematic for you?
No, they're not. The low numbers are problematic for me. This is an unusual attack in the sense that the range of uncertainty is so great. The difference between 150 killed and 2,000 killed is orders of magnitude. With respect to your guess, I'm inclined to believe Amnesty International's figures. I mean, this is a very well-established group, and I don't see any interest in why it would inflate the numbers and say that this is the most devastating attack, certainly in Nigeria, that they've ever witnessed. And yes, we do have satellite confirmation that the area has been completely razed to the ground. By contrast, I think that the Goodluck Jonathan administration is highly incentivized to do the opposite of exaggerating the numbers, but by basically trying to conceal the extent of the Boko Haram devastation. Of course, Jonathan has an election coming up, and he doesn't want to appear as if Boko Haram is in more control than the military. And so he has a strong interest in downplaying the numbers, and he has consistently, over the past few years, tried to suggest that international reports about Nigeria were wrong, that the government has things under control, and there's no evidence that any of that has been true.
Okay, understood, Max. Let's, Chidi, I'm not going to assume that everybody has all the background they need to understand this story, so let's take a step back for a second here. Boko Haram, what does that actually translate to?
From when they started, they translate to a group against everything Western.
But what does the word mean? What do the words mean, Boko Haram, when translated into English?
It means against education. That's literally, I'm not from that, I'm from the northern part, but it means against Western culture, against Western education. That's really literally what it translates to. That's what it means.
In what language?
In like Hausa language.
Okay, we'll show more about the houses in a second.
Okay.
What's their agenda? What do they want?
Exactly. They don't want anything that is Western. They don't want Western education. They don't want Western technology. But the contradiction here is that they use machine guns that are made by modern technology. They use cell phones. They make videos. So it's kind of, that's why at the beginning everybody was confused. Like, what do they really want? And that's why I say it's been dynamic, it's been progressive. They started, then they see what is going on around the world now. They kind of copy what other terrorist organizations are doing. They copy Al-Qaeda, they copy ISIS. You know, they don't have an original brand, I would say, if that's for choice of words, okay? So it's difficult to understand what they want. Right now, we are seeing that they want to establish a caliphate. They want to establish their own government.
They're similar to IS in that way.
Exactly, because they are deposing the emir or the chief in the place, and then they're imposing their own government. They're hosting their flags and establishing their own government.
Max, how long has the group been around for?
Well, it really got on the radar in its current form, I would say around 2009, 2010, when the current leader, Shekau, came to power. The group really transitioned after that point into its modern day version, where all of a sudden, A, the level of violence dramatically increased, and B, the nature of that violence changed. Whereas prior to that point, most of the violence was directed against the government and the military. It was really only under Shekau where we see such indiscriminate bloodshed against the civilian population, against women, against children. So I would say the modern day version begins around 2010.
And would you say that they also have an agenda similar to Islamic State, to recreate the caliphate and so on?
Well, I think that there's variation in the extent to which terrorist groups are ideologically pure, as well as the extent to which terrorist groups act strategically. I would say that Boko Haram is on the low end of both. I don't think that ideology dictates its behavior. I don't think the people carrying out these attacks are good Muslims. In fact, I think they probably know extraordinarily little about Islam. Your guest is quite right that they behave in all sorts of contradictory behaviors. And so I don't put much stock in their ideology. And frankly, in terms of what they want, that's also a very difficult question. This is more like a marauding gang, which is interested in instilling fear and gobbling up territory and attracting attention and gaining women and weapons and money. Again, this isn't an ideological group, and I think that their goal mainly is to maximize bloodshed for their own personal enrichment.
Okay, let's bring up some numbers that may, again, help us understand a little more deeply what's going on over there. Here's Nigeria, where this is all happening. A GDP, gross domestic product, close to $500 billion. The population, over 177 million people. That, of course, makes it the most populous country on the continent of Africa. There are many different ethnic groups there, the Hausa and Fulani representing about 29% of the population, Yoruba 21%, Igbo 18%, and if we look at religious breakdown, about half the country is Muslim, about 40% Christian, and 10% other indigenous beliefs. We're going to bring up some more maps now, so again we can see the nature of the attacks that we've been hearing about. And as this map indicates, the big circles here suggest very large attacks resulting in large numbers of fatalities. You see those mostly up in the northeast quadrant of that map, but of course sprinkled throughout the area are other smaller attacks as well, still resulting in fatalities, of course. And one more, let's bring up a third map. This is how the country breaks down. Chidi, maybe you can help us with this one here. If you look at the monitor up here over your shoulder, Hausa, Fulani, the 29% up in the northern part of our map, Yoruba on the western part, Igbo down in the south. Can you talk about the significance of how people are divided here?
Well, like the country Nigeria is basically divided on two strong lines. You have the religious lines, and then you have the ethnic lines. Now, on religion, it's predominantly basically between the Christian and the Muslim. And the Christians are populated in the west, while the Muslims are in the north. Okay, now, ethnic-wise, you also find that the Muslims are, the larger population of the Muslims are made up of people of the Fulani, the Hausa, they're mostly Muslim, while the Igbos and the Yorubas are mostly Christians. That's how the divide is in Nigeria.
Can you give us some insight into the history between Christians and Muslims there? Has it been violent for a long time?
I can tell you that it wasn't that violent in the past, but there's always existed tension between the Muslim and the Christians. And we would normally trace it back to the colonial times, and Nigerians actually have a lot to blame on the British, the former British rulers, because they think that the British left Nigeria with a system where they wanted the North that were not then highly educated to hold on to power by all means. And that is actually what led to the Civil War. You know about the Biafran War.
Biafra, sure.
Yeah, the Biafran War was fought between the North and the South, which is also like the Christians and the Muslims.
1960s,
in the 1960s,
I guess.
Yeah, in the 60s. Now, the outcome of that Civil War is that the southern part, the southeastern part, the Igbos mainly lost the war under General Ojukwu then. They lost the war, and right from then, it's been very difficult for them to assume leadership roles. So it's always been the North and the Muslims that have been in power until recent down the road when other ethnic groups could get their hands on power.
What are you, if I can ask?
I am Igbo.
You're an Igbo?
Yeah.
Okay. And your religion is what?
Christianity.
Christian. Okay.
Yeah.
Max, help us out with this. Nigeria's economy has been thought to be one of the really, truly good success stories in Africa. And I wonder how destabilizing you think all of what's going on that we're talking about tonight, how destabilizing is all of that to what Nigeria is trying to accomplish economically?
You know, in the West, we tend to conflate, you know, a nation and country. We view everybody in the nation as part of one country. But in Nigeria, and I'd be interested in your other guest's opinion on this, it doesn't seem to really work that way. There isn't a sufficiently high degree of national cohesion. You're right that a lot of, you know, economic data and metrics happen at a national level, but the violence should perhaps be understood more on a regional level. And so what you have is relatively impressive national, you know, economic production driven by oil, primarily due to the relatively peaceful South, whereas the northern part of the country is completely on fire. And in terms of the trajectory of the insurgency, you have to wonder whether it will begin to, you know, increasingly compromise the south? Will it move down there? It seems to me that that's not exactly what Boko Haram's plan is. It seems that they're concentrating in the northeast, and that in particular, to the extent that they're trying to grow, they're trying to gain power across the border into Chad, into Cameroon. But I think clearly the big fear is that they'll begin to move south and they'll begin to move west, and then essentially this civil war will operate on a national level.
So I infer from that, Max, that you think the Boko Haram, they're not interested in existing borders. They have designs well beyond Nigeria. Is that right?
I think that that's right, and I think that unfortunately they're trying to take a page out of Islamic State's book. The leader Shekau has said that he does want to establish a caliphate. Frankly, he doesn't seem to respect not just borders, but anything at all. And to the extent that he can aggrandize his power, he'll do so. I think that by securing the borders, though, that really is an important step for Boko Haram, because then it could funnel in more weapons and things. It could also try to get safe havens on the borders, and so it fortifies its position.
Chidi, if it's the case that Boko Haram has designs on territory well beyond Nigeria's borders, I want to ask you, how have the neighboring countries responded to this threat?
Steve, I'd like to go beyond that to say that I have issues with the international community. I think that they are playing with Boko Haram.
Playing with them?
Yes.
In what respect?
Because they don't really understand the threat that Boko Haram poses to. It's not just about the neighboring countries around Nigeria, but to the international community. Now, when Chad is nothing to them, Niger is nothing to them, these countries are not powerful. They can overrun them. If they turn their attention to these countries like they have turned in Nigeria, they will overrun them in a week. I'm telling you,
the military is just not up to it.
No, they don't. And once they overrun these people, they're not Africa. And what does it take for them to go into Europe? So I think it is important that the international community turns around and focuses on what is happening in that sub-region.
You think Boko Haram is a threat to European countries as well?
I know they are.
You know they are?
Yeah, I'm telling you, because you see, when they started, from when they started till now, they've acquired so much ammunition. Those boundaries, those border countries, they are very porous, okay? And their economies are not great. They are willing to do anything. So and you have just a straight line that can lead you through North Africa, through the Sahara, and then once you cross there's really nothing up there. It's arid, it's desert, people don't really live there. So things can go on without being checked. And before you know it, it's too late. Like he has said, it is a very important thing for them that they've captured that border. And that's why they stay there. That's why they're really there, okay?
Max, I want to circle back to something you referred to in your first answer, and to that end, I think to the extent that anybody's heard of Boko Haram, it has to do with the kidnapping of all of those schoolgirls. Michelle Obama had a picture of herself tweeted out in the Oval Office with the hashtag #BringBackOurGirls. I mean, that really captured a great deal of the world's attention when that was taking place. Here we have this latest attack. Whether you believe the low numbers or the high numbers, there's a lot of people being killed, and there hasn't been the same kind of international response, the same kind of campaign to do something about Boko Haram. Why not, do you think?
Well, you'll recall that in April, when all of those women were seized, I don't think the international community was accustomed to a terrorist group, snatching hundreds of women and raping them and selling them off into slavery. So it was particularly shocking. Unfortunately, since that happened, another terrorist group has replicated that behavior. Islamic State has done essentially the same thing with the Yazidi women. And so I think that that initial case was in some ways particularly shocking and drew a lot of attention. I also agree with the thrust of your question. Yes, it's true, Bring Back Our Girls was a very popular hashtag on Twitter, and in that sense, it was a bottom-up initiative. But, the wife of the most, the strongest, most influential person in the world was also advocating on their behalf. However, I do want to point out that I don't think the question really is why hasn't Baga gotten the same amount of attention as the Bring Back Our Girls, because in a way, unfortunately, the Baga massacre is the norm. What wasn't the norm, what was the deviation from the standard, if you will, was that momentary international interest in the women who were seized in April.
I know, Chidi, that you want the international community to get more involved.
Yeah.
But as you well know, the Western world at the moment is trying to get out of more than a decade of involvement in foreign parts. I'm talking about the Middle East, we're talking about Iraq, talking about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
They don't want more foreign entanglements. So what expectation do you have that the rest of the world is going to do anything about this?
You know why they should get involved? It's because this is not, the West is not a breeding ground for these things. These guys are recruited on the internet, these young people, they go back to these places and they are trained and they are coming back to the West. So the more you leave them, they are free, they are running wild. And that's very soon, like you have said, it is the norm to just attack a place. It's not, they like impactful things, they like to do things. If they bomb a train station, if they bomb an airport in New York, in Canada, then it makes noise. So very soon, they're going to start looking after those targets.
So we in the West have a direct national security interest in getting involved in this?
Of course.
In which case, what would you like to see us do?
Steve, the question I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, is when everybody opted to help out in Nigeria, what did they do? Canada, US, everybody, when we're saying bring back our girls, and let me tell you, when we're shouting bring back our girls, that was a wrong slogan to be using. Yes, because everybody was focusing on the president and saying, go bring back our girls. No, the focus should have been Boko Haram, release the girls. And if we said, Boko Haram, where are the girls, release then we turn our attention. Boko Haram wasn't big then. If US and Canada was serious, they could obliterate Boko Haram in days.
With troops?
With troops.
Boots, so
boots on the ground.
You want to see boots on the ground?
I don't even know what they did. Up till now, I'm wondering, what did they do then? I don't know what they did.
Max, do you think putting Western countries' soldiers into the region would help resolve this?
Yes, I do think that it would certainly help. I mean, again, good luck Jonathan and his military has been extraordinarily feckless. You put, some special operations, U.S. trained forces, and I think that we would absolutely zip through Boko Haram in any direct confrontations with them.
Well, how many people are we talking about for Boko Haram? Any estimate of how numerous they are?
It's in the thousands, but like low thousands. If I were to guess, 5,000, 8,000 at the most, or something like that. That's a much smaller organization than Islamic State, which could have 50,000 members. However, I do disagree on an important point with your guest. Although I think that it's possible that Boko Haram will become an even bigger group and an even bigger international threat, maybe even a global threat. It's conceivable that that may one day happen, but it should be said very clearly that we're not at that day. In fact, although there is some sort of inspirational, aspirational, similarities and overlap between Islamic State and Boko Haram, there is no known operational coordination by them. Furthermore, demographically, they're very, very different. Islamic State and even Al-Qaeda are made up to a large extent of foreigners. And they, these jihadists come from at least 80 different countries. And then there's the fear that they may return to their home country, like in France, and attack a soft target. That's really not the case with Boko Haram, which is overwhelmingly Nigerian. And so I do not view it as that much of an international threat as your guest does. And that's an important point, because the U.S. and will only really get involved militarily if it deems Boko Haram a direct threat to the homeland. And American officials just don't view it that way at this point.
Okay, Max, thanks very much. I've got to stop you there. We're plumb out of time. Max Abrams, the terrorism expert at Northeastern University, we thank you for being there for us on the Skype line to Boston, Massachusetts, and Chidi Wanyanwu, Social Secretary for the Nigerian Canadian Association. It's good of you to come into TVO tonight and help us out with this.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you to both.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.